Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, brought to you by spiritualteachers.org. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. Hello and welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I have two announcements before we start the episode. The first is that we have a new group in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's called TAT West. You can find out more at tatwest.spiritualteachers.org. We meet twice a month, once in person and once via Zoom. In each meeting, we explore what's called the Workbook of the Self, which is a guided set of 24 exercises. So this isn't a casual discussion group, but it's a program of exploration that requires active participation. If you're interested in finding out more, again, you can go to tatwest.spiritualteachers.org. You can also look up TAT West on Instagram or Facebook. And there's also a upcoming TAT Foundation event, which is the November TAT Gathering titled Certainty. That will be November the 8th through the 10th in North Carolina, and it features an excellent lineup of spiritual finders, including Arnima Pundir, Art Tickner, Bob Sergel, Dan McLaughlin, Mike Gegenheimer, Norio Kushi, Paul Constant, and Paul Resendez. This is the last in-person meeting of the year for the TAT Foundation, so if you can get to that one, I definitely recommend it. And you can find out more at tatfoundation.org. And now I'm happy to introduce this month's episode, which is an interview with Tyler Matthew. Tyler has been a speaker at a few of the TAT Foundation events. I've had a couple of occasions to speak with him briefly. But it was actually one of the listeners to this podcast that sent me an email and suggested that they would really appreciate it if I interviewed Tyler. And I just thought, well, that's a great idea. I don't know why I haven't done that already. I know that Tyler in his talks has referenced a number of people that I think very highly of, like Norio Kushi, Franklin Merrill Wolf, Mike Snyder, and others. So I was looking forward to doing this, and I just want to welcome Tyler and say thank you for taking the time to and agreeing to do this interview.
Thanks, Sean. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to see what comes out.
All right, sounds good. Uh, I know sometimes people don't really care for talking about their history and their past and personal stuff and so forth. So I try to find some way to trick them into doing that just a little bit to give listeners some idea of who you are and your history, just in case they're completely new to you. And I was curious if if you were the type of person who was always interested in spiritual matters from a young age, or if you were someone who had an event or something happen that brought the spiritual to the forefront. What would you say to that question?
Well, I would say this. I was pretty much a regular asshole for the first 20 years of my life. I grew up in a really nice, loving family, but I wasn't a terrible, terrible person, but I was pretty selfish kid, pretty self-absorbed, and ultra, ultra ambitious, uh, related to career stuff and sports, and that really kind of carried me through college. Even though I got introduced to the Buddha there and I resonated with it, I started trying to meditate. I still hadn't really caught in the bug. I went to law school and had some success there, and then got a really prestigious job out of law school, and it was really there where I was about 26 or so. I started having a pretty serious existential crisis. Um, I looked around after a couple of years, and the euphoria of getting this great job had started to wear off, and I just started noticing uh, people weren't particularly happy. Some of them were brilliant, but they weren't particularly happy, and I noticed I wasn't particularly happy. And this really kicked off almost a sense of anger because I remember I remember vividly thinking, I really did what society asked me to do. I went out, I got a really good job, I'm making good money, I have friends, I've traveled, I've done a lot of international travel even. I did what I'm asked, and not only am I not happy, I'm pretty stressed, and I'm feeling like I've been lied to, and that this is not really what I signed up for. And as that existential crisis took hold, there were some parallel events of a bad breakup with a girl that just kicked off just a massive episodes of panic, and it was quite terrible. And at the time, I just didn't know what was happening. But what was happening is the smallest little portal for the light to come through was doing just that. And it was very soon thereafter that a just real robust, not only curiosity, but kind of just obsession with spirituality and truth and all those things just kicked into really high gear. Whereas before it had been, I was interested and I was trying to meditate and I'd read some books and I'd listen to some talks, but it just really hadn't taken hold. But after I had been kind of wounded and some light came in, it just it came full frontal, and I was I was in it there. I was a seeker at that point.
And when you say some light came in, what do you mean by that?
Well, I ran across a quote once. Rumi said, "The wound is where the light comes in," and I've talked a few times about this, and that really was exactly what it felt like. I felt wounded. I literally felt the pain in my heart, like I had been knocked down, and like my world was kind of crashing around me. But at the same time, that getting knocked back and having that wound, it really just opened up this other energy to just peek its little head out for the first time. And I'll never forget. I was this was just all happening, and I went down one night after work, and I was wandering around Barnes and Noble, and I was just lost. Wasn't sure, and I just picked up this book by Lester Levinson called The Sedona Method. And I just remember almost immediately, the first page or two that I read, I thought, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. This is going to be the passion of my life. It was almost like I had found my calling. And I was so excited. And it didn't get me right out of the panic attacks right away, but it was like something had opened up. So I do feel like there is a wound that is I've heard other people talk about that. Some of us get a little maybe easier entry onto the path, but mine came through some pretty kind of dark night stuff. So it's generally how I view it, and I think Rumi kind of articulated it well when he said it like that.
Well, I find it really interesting that you mentioned Lester Levinson. Back in maybe 2000, 2001, maybe I came across his name and actually got a hold of a spiral bound copy of that book.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, I haven't heard him mentioned by anyone in a long time. So it's really cool that of all the people that you came across, that would be the one.
Yeah, I'll just say I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but I think I am very indebted to Lester because some of his students I think have, and this isn't a judgment, but they've taken some of his teachings to use to get onto abundance and manifestation and things, which you can do. But if you really look at what Lester was actually pointing at, it's incredibly similar and in the same kind of teaching lineage as Ramana Maharshi. And that's often overlooked, but he really, really spoke to me, and we'll probably get into it later, but similar to some other teachers, he really kind of a lot of his path was learning how to deal with emotions and programming conditioning that was arising and how to move through that and use it to your quest for truth or self-realization, whatever you want to call
I listened to a talk or part of the talk that you did, I believe it was maybe in 2022 with the TAP Foundation. And you mentioned letting go. That seemed to be a theme or a very important aspect of the search that you were mentioning. Do you think that at this very early stage in your search, the beginning of your search, did you have an experience of letting go? Did that have something to do with the light coming in?
Yeah, letting go is it's a it's a real kind of hard thing to talk about because if you're trying to let go, you're not letting go. So usually the letting go, I found it is spontaneous. But for me, and it's usually a result of seeing something, and when you see it, there's an automatic letting go. But regardless, I I'll just kind of continue on since your question leads into it. After I had this wound and got on the path, I was in the kind of honeymoon meditator phase, and I was kind of an evangelical for it, which really was, I'm sure, very annoying to a lot of people. But and then on my 30th birthday, it had only been a few, not that long years, but I was really into it. On my 30th birthday, I had a huge, I call it a Satori awakening because it really felt like the veil completely dropped, and I not only got a glimpse of what I was. That would take some years to really see, but I got a view of what life was like beyond all your conditioning, which I think a lot of traditions describe as kind of nirvanic consciousness. What is life in just pure flow, where there's no thinking, there's no desire, there's really no emotions, there's just pure presence, pure awareness, unmitigated by any viewpoints or intellectual, shenanigans. So I had that big awakening, and it lasted a couple days. Um, and what I didn't realize at the time was one way that my path could be described as I got that big awakening. I drifted back down to somewhat a normal consciousness within the ensuing weeks. And really, maybe the simplest way to describe my story is the entire path has been ascending to that exact same place that I got a short glimpse of when I was 30. And there's been lots of crazy ups and downs and things we'll probably get into, but it was like at age 30, you get a vision of what it could be and what some of these mystics are pointing at, and then it's kind of taken away and you go back down and now you're in your thoughts and your programming conditioning is there and your beliefs are all there. And so really that basically just kicked off an ascendant movement basically for years and years to get back to living basically from the same place in a more stable condition.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if around that age 30, if you would have described yourself as someone who was after something, meaning after enlightenment, after some state of being.
Yes, I was a seeker, seeker, seeker. It was kind of after I got that awakening that when I drifted back down, it came. I've described it before. It felt like a person that's been lit on fire, dumped in gasoline and been lit on fire, and is just looking for water. It was like just an amazing desperation and earnestness. And I've heard folks, and especially in TAT, talk about a longing to go home, and I've thought, oh, boy, that would have been nice. I wish I had a longing because I just had an almost fierceness about this that was really, really unpleasant at times and difficult, but definitely did do its job. Um, and but it wasn't easy. But yeah, I was very much after trying to basically get back to that place where there was really no desire and there was just relaxed living without being bombarded by negative thoughts and feelings. I mean, really, it's almost that simple.
I know that Nisargadatta Maharaj has said that earnestness is one of the key qualities for a seeker to develop. Would you agree with that? Would you take issue with that based upon your own experience?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. I owe this one to Tat and not a teacher. I don't know who this person was. I went to a TAT meeting fairly early on after this. I can't even remember the dates. My short-term memory is so shot. But I was at a meeting and I was somehow we were in a circle sharing our experience. And I started speaking of I just cannot get away from this kind of fierce earnestness. You know, I can't make it go away. I can't get a break. And I was viewing it as a problem because it did feel like a problem. You know, I'm on fire here. I'm looking for water, and I'll never forget it. I mean, it's just the most. This wasn't a teacher. This guy looks at me. I don't even know. I can't remember his name. I've never seen him since. And he looks at me and he says, you know, he gets his voice goes kind of lowers, and he gets quiet. And he just looks at me, and I just feel a connection with him. And he says, you know, the really great masters say that is the greatest gift that you could have received in this life. And at that moment, it was just like a switch flipped in me. It's like, oh my God, I think he's right. I mean, that was a gift. I was viewing it as a problem, but in reality, it was that earnestness that was, you know, pushing me and pushing me. And it still took some time, but once I finally learned how to actually kind of focus that earnestness and not view it as a problem, I mean, it was by far and away, the whole path has been filled with so many instances of grace, but that would be the biggest one, even bigger than the awakenings, like that you had that and you were, I mean, it just came on its own. I can't even say I cultivated it, but it was a huge asset. So if I ever encounter anyone that has that, I try to say the similar message, you know, and that's a great, great gift if you have that. And it isn't to say that I think people that are more passive are just shit out of luck. I mean, that awakenings can happen to anyone at any time, but I do view earnestness as a huge component to being able to get wherever you want to go with this, basically.
You mentioned something about learning to focus that earnestness. I think that was the term you used. Could you say a little about that?
Yeah, you know, when this earnestness came, I just feel like a man on fire. I was doing what I actually see a lot of people that I encounter now doing, which was I was kind of all over the place. I mean, I was just reading book after book and trying technique after technique, going on all these different retreats for a while. We'll get into it later, but for a while, like contacting bunches of different teachers, it was it was almost like a shotgun approach. And um, surprise, surprise, there really wasn't any real lasting relief there. I mean, there would be moments, but in reality, there was mostly just frustration. And it took a long time and some years and working with a teacher a lot individually, but learning to kind of hone that in and instead of being all over the place, you know, dialing in and figuring out, okay, what's my path and what's my self-inquiry and sticking with that. I'll just say as an aside, I watched a video maybe a couple years ago Um, a guy got Warren Buffett and Bill Gates together, and he asked them to each write on a piece of paper blindly so the other couldn't see. So write one word that you think is the most important thing for someone to basically be successful. And neither one knew what the other person wrote. But surprise, surprise, they both wrote focus. And I think it's a huge component. And it took a long time for me to learn to do it. So it's not like it's an easy thing necessarily, but I found it to be so important. And I try to tell people, the ones that email me, how important it was for me, but I also realized that, you know, this is going to go the way it's going to go, and I really couldn't bypass those crazy shotgun years. That just had its place, and something was moving me along all on its own the entire time anyway. But the focus eventually came online, and I'm thankful it did, so I could channel that earnestness in a very productive way, basically.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned self-inquiry. I'd really like to know how you define that word.
Well, I view it because I when I say self-inquiry, I'm talking about the real self, the self with a capital S. So I view it as just looking and seeing what's real, what's already present. It's really not. I know we often the way we talk about it, it sounds goal-centered and things, but it's really looking and seeing what's already here. What's already going on, what are you already believing, what feelings are already arising, what perceptions are already there, what about you is already eternal and existing outside of space and time, and looking at it and inquiring into it and putting your attention on it. So that to me is self-inquiry. It's not really, it does get viewed, and I can't help but talk about it sometimes as a goal to reach self-realization or liberation or whatever you want to call it. But to me, it's really as simple as looking and seeing what's already there. And in time, falling in love with doing that. That's what really happened to me. I mean, falling in love with putting the attention on what I found to be my unborn self and working with Mike Snyder, which I'm sure we'll get into. But basically focusing on that, coming back to that, inquiring ever deeper into it, as opposed to before staying in the realm of mind and thinking and trying to understand it there and reading never-ending books and things like that just didn't it just didn't work, but it had its place. But eventually, um, bringing that focus to self-inquiry, as it's kind of I've defined it here, it is what worked for me.
Would you consider that a form of meditation?
Meditation's an interesting word. I've noticed kind of like the word awareness and even mind. We all bring kind of maybe a different understanding what that means to us. Meditation at one time I did view as an activity to try to get to a certain state of consciousness. I now view meditation as simply being myself, what I already am. It really isn't an activity anymore. It's simply just being what I found myself to be consciously. And so I don't really that word though, I know a lot of people view it as you got to quiet your mind. You're trying to stop your thoughts, and that's fine if they view meditation like that. I view it more as just being what I already am consciously.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about Mike Connors. I know that he's someone that you discovered during your search. I was curious if his idea of effortless meditation, if it kind of ties in with what you're talking about right now.
Um, Not particularly. I talked to Mike Connors twice, I think. I think Mike Connors was an incredible gift to me. Not for the reason we're talking about now, but I'll just say for his notion of effortless meditation was definitely geared towards, and I never took to it. It just wasn't my path, but it was actually, I did see at one point when I was trying it, it was actually a means to erode and degrade the tendencies we have to try to control experience. And so the more you got on to effortless meditation, the more that kind of energy, that controlling energy was actually eroding, which then I feel if someone carried it out exactly like Mike did, can be used when you stop trying to control experience. You're able to focus more on self-inquiry without an agenda. And so I think he used that as a tool. I just didn't take to it. I didn't. I tried it many times. I just didn't take to it. It wasn't my path. But I think his was, there was actually a little bit of an agenda to effortless meditation, and it literally had to do with some dissolving of some controlling energetic tendencies that we as human beings just naturally have.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'm trying to hone in a little bit. I guess I'm trying to get a little more feel for how that evolved, what that looked like or felt like when you sat down to meditate or just throughout your day. What was happening in you?
Well, I guess I should back up a little bit and remind me to circle back to Mike Connors too at some point. When the earnestness had come online, I also started working with someone. His name's Mike. I guess he likes being anonymous. I'll just call him Mike. I had met him through this is a different Mike than Mike Connors. I met him through I think it was a Raleigh event or something. But anyway, I just took to what he was saying, and I felt a real resonance with his words. So I emailed him, and we incredibly embarked on quite a few year teacher. I mean, he never viewed himself as a teacher, but it really was basically a teacher-student relationship, kind of like old school Zen. Like you find the Zen master and you just go sit with them. And I did that. And so that earnestness, a lot of it, a great deal of it for a number of years was working really just with what he was pointing at. Because I knew he had the goods. I mean, and I really, really tried to understand what he was pointing at. And so as this went along, slowly but surely, with fits and starts, sometimes it was kind of two steps forward, one step back, I got on to what he was pointing at. And it started to evolve for me. And as that happened, I didn't need so much of his verbal pointings anymore, but I was able to do it myself and basically draw attention into what he was pointing out, which he calls the absolute identity. In Zen, they might call it the Dharmakaya. Ramana would call it the self. But basically, coming into ever more rapport with that on a moment by moment basis. And so that earnestness for many times was filtering through the intellect working with him. And then eventually it kind of caught on, not unlike, you start a fire kind of kindling, and it takes a while to actually get the fire going. That's really how it was. And so, I mean, I view working with him as just probably one of the greatest gifts of my life. I mean, that really to me was necessary. And to my own credit, I did my part, like I didn't shortchange myself. Like I really tried to see what he was pointing at, and we went back and forth for thousands of emails, and I flew up and sat with him, and it really evolved like that. But eventually, it was less and less verbal, less and less communication, and more just being able to abide with what he was pointing at, which is basically that right now, for everyone listening to this, your true self, your absolute identity is fully here in the exact same way it's fully here in deep sleep and in the dream state and in the waking state. And you can learn to actually begin to bring your attention to it and first recognize it, but then over time and a lot of fits and starts, you can learn to abide by it. And it's very similar to what Zen described as abide as the unborn, or Ramana says abide as the self. But that's what I was doing. And it took a really long time to get onto it, but that's what I was doing. And in other words, as I've said to a lot of people, I very naturally became more interested in being at point A than I was trying to get to point B. And that's what my work with Mike was really about. That's why I call it self-inquiry. You're looking, you're abiding in what's already there. What about you is already online and actually fully realized and fully enlightened right now? And that's what we did, and that's kind of how it unfolded. Obviously, there were lots of different things that happened within those years too, but that's generally how it kind of unfolded for me.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And by point A, you mean where you are right now, as
Yeah,
opposed to point B in the future?
yeah. Point B is it's an idea we have in our head that naturally arises through human conditioning. And Norio, I like how he talks about living for a future. It's what seekers are naturally doing. It's not a judgment. It's a very normal thing that arises in human psychology of we're trying to get to this other thing, whether it's $1 million, fame, the perfect body, the perfect relationship, or spiritual enlightenment. We have an idea that if we can get to that thing, then it's going to come up, everything's going to come right for us, and it's very alluring, and we all do it. And a lot of my path was beginning to slowly and surely wean off that, not just mentally, but literally energetically, and start to become more interested rather than reaching some final destination, but become more interested in what's already here. What about me is already existing outside of space and time? You know, what about me is already eternal? What about me never changes? What about me is so obvious that like we just overlook it? And so it was really that process. And I'll just say, Sean, you know, it's I'm talking like I have some personal responsibility here, but in reality, what really it's just obvious what happened is what I am was like everyone polarized towards experience, polarized towards the world. We come into this that way, this human experience. We're looking for experiences. We're in our heads, and then there's an awakening. But it isn't really the personal self that awakens. It's what we are. The subjective pole of consciousness, if you will, awakens. Like it's like literally what we are. Kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it just there's a shift in polarization. And so as that shift happens over many, many years, what we are becomes more interested in just being what it is than in having a different experience. I heard Ajahn Sumchi once say, like, um, sobering up from experience, and I thought, I concur. That's exactly what it felt like. It's like the end of chasing experiences in all its guises, including spiritual experiences, and learning, not really learning, but actually being pulled towards what we already are and finding, I mean, more basically satisfaction and contentment and just being that. And so I don't really take any personal credit for any of this. It all happened totally on its own. I don't know why the awakening happened. You know, why the self, that pole awakened. It just did. But that's kind of how I view it.
Thank you. I think I'm sure this is related in some way. You've mentioned the importance of feeling your feelings. And I know that I recall talking with Mike Connors about that and how important he felt that was. Is that well, for you, was that something that needed to happen so that you could have more success in abiding in what is, I don't know, a better way to put it. But I think
Yeah,
you get what I'm asking.
yeah, I do. Um, I kind of feel like for me, and this is just how I describe it, but there was a part of my search that was very what I kind of just described from the bird's eye view, you know, looking at, watching what I am shift away from experience, learning to abide as itself, then realizing what it is, but then also realizing that what it is synonymous with the world. That's a further realization we can talk about later on. That's kind of a bird's eye view. But what I do emphasize with people, and because I'm a realist about this, is that's maybe what's happening. But when you're down in the dirt, the flip side of the coin, just the human experience. I mean, we are just walking around in this life being constantly bombarded and having our resistance hit, our triggers hit. Some of us have had traumatic childhoods. I didn't even have a traumatic childhood, but I was blown away by the amount of anger that would arise as I was moving along, and shame and fear that they were existing in me. And so while I'm working with Mike Schneider and trying to get on his pointers and the more absolutist and realization and that, I was also just like everybody else, just trying to navigate a human life. And it's really hard because these feelings can be really, really powerful. At least they were for me. And so I'm really thankful for Mike Connors because he addressed that component of it, the human component of, like, I'm getting my ass kicked here. What do I do? I mean, what do I do with this anger? Like, it's fine to try to abide as the I am or the unborn or whatever, but sometimes that anger is really overpowering, or there's a deep feeling of shame or something. It's a little bit naive to think we're just going to be able to just turn away from that. Sometimes we can't. And I learned that the simplest thing and the most effective thing by far is to learn to feel your feelings. And if you do that, if you can allow your feelings to just come up and feel them without trying to get rid of them, you move through a lot of this stuff, a lot of this stuff. And that to me feels like a parallel track. I mean, they're one and the same now, but like it was like I got that human thing going on, and then I got this other, trying to realize what I am, working with Mike, and now they're seen as one and the same. But it really, to me, like I had a lot of resistance and feelings, and the amount of even hurt. I had a nice childhood. I mean, I don't even know why, but I would go along and I felt like there was just massive feelings of rejection and pain it didn't even feel like it was mine. It was like just part of human psychology that we inherit. And so I'm a realist about like that has to be navigated. Like, I mean, maybe you'll get like someone listening to this, you get lucky and have some amazing awakening and it blows it all away. But for me, it was like that really, I had to learn to navigate that in exactly the same way I had to learn to navigate the more hot and fast pursuit of self-realization. So it was kind of like these twin tracks. And a long time I kind of was aware of it almost. So it's like there's like two things, it's like two sides of a coin. Like you can't really just have, for me, it wasn't like just paying attention to one wasn't going to do it. They were both there. And so Mike Connors and you did a really nice. I mean, I just thought that closely and close thing was just dynamite. All three of the guys, but Mike Connors, what he said there was just it really helped me a lot. Really, really helped me a lot.
Yeah, certainly doing that film and interviewing Mike was it helped me really get a better sense of what Mike was about and
Yeah,
what he had been through. And yeah, that had an effect on me as well. That idea of feeling your feelings. And it sounded like you were saying that it was happening at the same time that you were involved with Mike Snyder, but it doesn't sound like you really were thinking to yourself, oh, I have these emotional blocks or whatever, and I need to figure out how to work with those. It sounded more organic than
Yeah,
that.
it was. It was, and that's a good way to put it. It was kind of like just learning because, Mike, the guy I was working with the pointers on, he really wasn't interested in that stuff. And so it was something I had to learn to kind of navigate on my own. That was kind of maybe more unique to my path that I just realized, I can't, sometimes these things come up, these deep resistance and these deep fears, and I can't just do these other pointers and expect that all to go away. I learned it's not realistic. It didn't. And so maybe it can for other people. I don't know. But for me, it was like, no, this wants to be felt. This is actually trying to release. It's also tied into a lot of the negative thinking that was naturally arising. And so it was another component for me that just was really important. And not so much realizing what I am, but allowing it to stabilize with it. And I don't know if, for whatever reason, I just had more than other people. I don't know. But I can just tell you there were many times where I thought, wow, I had no idea I was sitting on that much anger and that much hurt. And I don't even know why, because I had a nice life for most practical purposes. I now think it's part of what Carl Jung kind of talked about, the collective unconsciousness. I think Norio kind of talked about as sorrow, and Mike Connors just talked about as suppressed emotional stuff that we'd all just kind of have. And so for me, I feel like you can't bypass that stuff. I couldn't. Um, maybe it's possible for other people. I don't know.
Is that something that still today you find a value in your everyday life? Well, like a feeling comes up and a part of you says, "Hey, let me pay attention to that,"
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
ignore it.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you ask that because when I try and every once in a while do a little bit of pointing for people, I try to get them onto because a lot of people will come. I would say, in my experience, the most people in the spiritual community are really looking for resolution to this issue. They have hurt inside them and negative things. I mean, there are some real truth seekers. I don't want to say there's not, but some of the people, and it's probably the majority that come find me, ask about this. Like, how do I move through this? And I always tell them, you know, it's not a quick thing. It's a lot of years. And the key is to when you can get to the point where you're actually excited when those feelings arise. So I don't get that much anymore. I wish I did. It's like literally an opportunity to transmute energy. It's literally an opportunity to literally feel yourself moving higher. So I wish it would come more. It's almost like it's a great gift. And when it's seen to be a great gift, person is really, really on their way. So I still every once in a while will have things, but nothing like those years with the really deep hurt and shame and anger, because you can move through it. And that's how you feel, in my experience, lighter. And even approaching what some of these masters talk about as weightless. Almost feeling like that you just don't even weigh anything. Like you've kind of like moved through this block of human, I don't know, unconscious hurt or something. I guess it's just built up for thousands of years and all the wars and things. I don't really know. I haven't been shown exactly where it comes from or why it's even there, but it is there, and to move through it is like it's a really, really wonderful thing. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it's an interesting choice of words you used because it reminds me of Paul Hederman, and traveling lighter is one of
Yeah.
his favorite phrases. So you are working with this fellow Mike. You have encountered Mike Connors, and it sounds like you were beginning to get a feel, maybe an intuitive grasp of what Mike was pointing you towards, and abiding more in that, or having more success in abiding in that. What happened? Like, I'd still like to know a little more of
Yeah,
that story of how
yeah,
did that
sure,
all pan out?
sure. Well, so when I finally started to get on to being able to abide as the unborn or abide as a self, which is really a feeling of resting, by the way. It's not an effortful thing, but the attention is drawn more and more to it. As I really started getting onto that, and after, by the way, what we were just talking about, moved through a lot of stuff, a lot of emotional stuff. So I'm abiding as the unborn, and I'm noticing a really curious thing. Maybe the key to the whole thing. I don't know. I'm noticing I'm not that interested in really experience much at all. And when I say experience, I mean any experience. I lost kind of interest in even enlightenment. I lost interest in reading anything. I even lost really kind of interest in listening much to Mike anymore. It was like I had sobered up from chasing any experiences, including spiritual ones, and it wasn't a strategy. It just had happened as I abided more and more. Just even you could say it even in the eternal now, whatever you call that, just resting there. And I really wasn't doing much, but I also felt like in some weird way it was happening for some reason. I mean, it did feel like, if I'm being honest, like it was leading somewhere. And because I had worked with Mike and because I had had a number of already kind of awakenings working with him, I had already realized that this thing that I was abiding as was me. It was truly who and what I was, but I wasn't. I had recognized it, but I hadn't realized it. This usually the distinction I make. In other words, I was still identifying as a separate somebody, but a separate somebody that's abiding as the unborn. Well, that went on for some years. I'm done chasing experiences. I'm not even interested in really realization anymore, but I'm very easily just abiding in this, just very easily abiding as point A. And then one weekend, I found myself in Mike's presence again, and he's just reading um, chapter 26 of the Raghu Gita, which happened to be something that Ramana Maharshi recommended to his students. And just like a lightning bolt from the sky, I mean, like a light switch just flipped on, and I immediately saw what that text was pointing at, and I realized, didn't recognize, I realized what I was, and that not only was I this unborn thing, I was absolutely everything else that was arising too. I was every sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, and my sense of identity was no longer a person in a body abiding or not abiding. It was, oh, I'm not a character in the scene, I'm the scene itself. And that is just literally not possible to describe what that's like. But I heard a Zen master say something once like it's similar to being enlightened by all things. And I thought, yep, that's it. That guy was on it because every thought is you. Every person is you, and every sight, smell, touch, and taste is you. And you know it is you. And so not only have you realized what you are, you just annihilated everything that wasn't you, including what some of these masters talk about, the secondary universe, like all the thoughts we have in our head, the content of our thoughts. Um, I realized none of it was real. The only thing that was real was me showing up as this scene right now. That's who and what I am. Um, and that's where that went. Now, it didn't stabilize fully at that moment for ever. It was a little bit of, oh, the realization, and then it would kind of feel like it get a little obscured. There was a little bit of time there where it was like kind of kind of like learning to walk again. Like, okay, this is really radical, and adjusting to it, I guess I would say. But that's really where it ended up, and it really hasn't changed to this day. It's just obvious now, and it's also not some of the excitement and newness of it is long gone. But it's just reality. It's just my original face, and that's what everything is. And not only everything, that's what it is. What was real is that's what it's always been. There was nothing, never anything else. That was the shocking thing to see about the personal self. It wasn't like, oh, I got rid of the ego. It's like, oh, there never was one, and that was shocking. That was an idea. That's all it had been, really, the entire time. So that's kind of how it played out in the realm of the story. But from the realm of realization and what was realized, it was just normal, the normal self that just became self-conscious or became self-reflective. It revealed itself to itself, and when that happens, I will testify absolutely nothing was gained. It was like, oh shit, that's always been like that. That's the truth. That's what's real, and everything else had just been really just thought, content of thoughts.
I believe you just said that you realized that there had never been an ego. Is that correct?
Yeah,
And I think I heard you say in another talk, you were talking about thoughts. I think you said that you realized that there had never been any thoughts. Is
yeah.
that what? Can you tell me a little more what you mean by that?
Well, I'll just I'll just give a disclaimer in case this is the point that the interview goes off the rails.
Go for it.
Um, so here's what I saw with this. When I realized what I was, and that what I was also the world that was arising. It was the ultimate annihilation of everything other than me. And so what I saw was not only was there not a personal self, there was nothing, period. There was no such thing as transmission. There was no such thing as awakening. There was no such thing as enlightenment. There was no such thing as self realization. There was just reality, what I found myself to be. Everything else was just a thought. But even the thought, the actual substance of thought, is also just reality. So that's why, if you really get onto this, if someone does, you don't have to ever worry about getting rid of thoughts anymore, because thoughts are just the expression of reality, just like everything else is, the computer screen I'm looking at right now. So it was annihilative of anything being something else that needs to be taken care of or done away with, fixed, or healed, basically. That makes sense.
You used the phrase secondary universe a few minutes ago. Is that related to what you're saying? That
Yeah,
all of that is a secondary universe?
yeah, so like there you are somewhere, somebody listening to this, some seeker. You're looking, and there's this something in front of you, maybe a room, maybe a bed, maybe some pictures, and that's the primary universe. That's actually, someday you can see that's actually you. That's you, your manifest form. That's you in your self-conscious form. That's you. Everything that you think about, well, my neighbor over there, they're an asshole, or I should get a new job, or my kids shouldn't be the way they are. All of that is the secondary universe, and it isn't real. It literally has no reality. The only thing that has reality is what's actually right in front of you right now. That is the primary universe. So if you see that, the content of your thoughts, all the content of your thoughts, are seen to be an illusion. They really aren't real. This is why, if you actually see this, and I'll give an anecdote too, that you see immediately there's no gurus, there's no teachers, there's no one higher or lower than you. When I used to work with Mike, I'd come in his presence, and I would, because I had a really strong belief that he was enlightened, that he was an elevated being, whatever, I would have these little Kensho experiences, like in his presence all the time. After I saw what I was, I saw, oh, Mike's not enlightened. Not at all. It's just reality. And immediately, I never had any other experience in his presence ever again. I've seen him many times since then. All that was gone. It was just a thought. It really had nothing to do with reality. It's the things we're thinking in our head, the ideas and conclusions we're coming to, they aren't real. The thought itself, the actual substance of it, is reality, but the content of that thought is an illusion. And what I find is the reason why I don't usually go down this road, and the reason why I said this may be the point, the juncture where this interview goes off the rails, because I find in some spiritual circles, this is annihilative of teachers and teaching streams, seeing that they're not actually, they're also just thoughts, and it's not really real in the way that we think it's real. And so I almost don't even like to impose, because it just reaches that level of annihilation of, there really are no gurus, and maps are just maps. They're conceptual constructs, and they're great. We can play with them, but they don't actually have anything to do with reality. They're just a way for reality to experience and talk about things, but they don't really have any more substance than that.
Oh, thank you. I think that's a helpful explanation. Appreciate that. We briefly talked about letting go, and I was just curious. I heard you say something to the effect of letting go, trying to control the world. And can we practice letting go? Like, is that something that is value in trying to practice that, or is the only way for that to happen is just by accident?
You know, in the Sean, when we come back, when we come back down from what we were just talking about, we come down from realization and we move back into relative experience. And this is where we play and we have fun. And I think it's really why reality creates it all. We actually create to have experience. What we are is actually the alone one. So we create so we have someone to talk to. And in that realm of experience, I found in the spiritual community, and I haven't sampled all of it, obviously there's so much, but there's many, many, many different things we can experience in the relative realm, and can and should. And one of the things, other than feeling your feelings, which fits into that I talked about with Mike Connors, is learning to let go is similar to an actual surrender practice that you can practice. You can't really make it happen, but you can have an orientation towards it. And the feeling is kind of relaxing, and just a sense of letting everything come and grow on the screen of consciousness, letting thoughts come and go, letting feelings come and go, letting your neighbor come and go. I mean, there's just a sense of you can practice starting to just allow things to exit and enter the view all on their own. And I think that's what a lot of people in the relative spiritual community are pointing at with the flow state. That they're really just, it's just that. There's just a letting everything arise and fall away all on its own. And there's no effort involved to try to fix or manipulate anything. So it's kind of tricky to say how we practice it, but I do think you can kind of have that orientation, you can have that intent, and you can feel a sense of, okay, there's thinking happening, and I can just let the thinking happen. And there's feelings happening, and I can just let the feelings happen. That's really what feeling your feelings is. You're really not doing anything. It's just letting them happen and then letting them leave on their own. And I found if you want to play in the field of relative experience, you can get on what some of these other mystics talk about is you can have things in your life really that have troubled you and been hard become much easier and more enjoyable to the very extent you let them just work themselves out. And I get a lot of pushback when I tell people that. But I say it isn't that you don't talk or that the body doesn't move around, but it's an orientation or an intent of let go, let God, let the higher power, let the intelligence handle this, and just let yourself be guided with how you might need to speak, or maybe you do have to take action or do something. There's a feeling to it that you can start to play with and touch on, and it can resolve things. What I found, I mean, it can cure a lot of things. Can cure health things. It can cure financial problems. I'm not going to make any grandiose claims or anything like that, but your life can start working out a lot better. And I've done it because I just think it's just one, it works, but two, it's just enjoyable to learn to just let everything kind of come and go. And that can be experienced. It, like I said, it's something different from the realization we were just talking. We kind of come down from that. But yeah, you can do that. And I encourage people to try it, see what happens for them.
If we could orient ourselves more towards letting things happen,
Yeah.
that would help dissolve some of that secondary universe. 'Cause, I mean, it's very obvious to me when I get all wound up about I gotta do X, Y, Z, or else.
Yep.
That's that's deep in the secondary universe.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to get caught into it. Franklin Merrill Wolf, who I think I'll just give a plug. I think him and Bernadette Roberts, if you're an intellectually orientated, high analytical person, they're as good as you're going to find. Um, but he talked about eventually kind of contacting the current, that there's literally, you can feel like there's a current. And I haven't experienced maybe to the extent that he was, but I have felt the more you can allow things to go away, there does almost feel like there's kind of an energy flowing kind of from the back of the heart through you, and you kind of feel like you are in like a little bit of a current. And I think that's what he was pointing at. I don't know for sure because he's sometimes not the easiest to read, but um, that's if you're interested in that, people that are listening to this, I would definitely check that out for sure.
So if someone came to you and they said, "Hey, I like what you were talking about with abiding in the self. How can I get some of that?" What would you say?
Oh, well, um, I mean, I try to point it out, but what I really like is to not. Um, I really like if anyone ever comes to me for them to lead the way and show me what they actually want. And I will just say, and this isn't a judgment or criticism, because it's absolutely no one's fault. It's just obvious. It's just a lot of folks are still in the realm of looking for experience. And even though they've been conditioned through their readings that seeking spiritual experience is bad, in reality, that's what they're doing. And I was too. And so that's why there's no judgment. I mean, it's happening all on its own. But when a person really wants to start getting onto abiding in the unborn, or abiding as the self. What kind of needs to happen is they kind of, in my experience, need to see that the chasing of experiences isn't really working. And if they see that enough, like I had started seeing it in working with Mike, then you might become more interested. And once a person gets to that place, then it's easier to point for them because then it can be like, okay, what about you right now can you literally intuit here now in the waking state is also there in the deep sleep state and there's no world. Can you sense that? Can you move into that intuitively and even almost on a very slight feeling level? What about you if you close your eyes and you think of the very first memory you had in your life and you sense that? What about you is there right now, was there, and is exactly the same right now that you look at whatever's unfolding in front of you, that hasn't changed at all? That it's literally outside of time and it's outside of space. It's eternal. Can you begin to sense that? This is what I mean when I say point A. Can you become interested in that? And that's how I try and point. That's how it was pointed out for me. And it just takes a long time. And the only problem I really find is that when you first start to come in contact with it, as my old teacher used to say, it's kind of an acquired taste. Because when you first come in contact with it, you can't help but be like, yeah, what's special about that? I mean, that's not even neat. I'm so familiar with that. Like that's not interesting. And so that's what I mean, that there's this kind of polarization away from experience towards you literally actually do eventually start to think it's kind of neat. And there's like, oh, there's a resonance to it and it can get deeper and it can get stronger. And there's a sense of, oh, I'm more interested in putting my attention on that than having some other enlightenment or Kensho experience or awakening or whatever you want to call it. And so if someone comes to me, I try and point like that, and it is what it is, and I'm a realist about it. I wasn't able to take to it for a long, long time, and so I know it's not easy, but that's what I try and point to anyway.
Something that you said in another talk, you're talking about what I would call is almost an attitude towards seeking, and that was to step into the idea that I'm in this for the long haul.
Huh. Oh man, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I would love to get to unpack that a little bit if you could.
Yeah, and this is probably me because I was just really the psychology I think probably inherited from my parents, but I had this after that big awakening at age 30. I thought I was gonna get done with all this and just get back there in a couple years. And because I thought that, I can see in retrospect I was pretty superficial. I really wasn't not only focused, but I was kind of uh what's the word? I don't want this to sound like mean, but almost kind of childish, like in a sense of entitlement. And I can just see like, oh, I just had so much in the realm of just normal experience, of human experience. I had to go through a real maturing phase. Like that isn't if you think that like you're just gonna get onto all this in like a year or 6 months, like yeah, you might. You also might go win the lottery if you go down and buy a ticket at the AM PM. But it's probably more this is gonna be your life and it's gonna be filled with ups and downs. And you really when you can really step into a sense of maturity and be like, you know what, I accept that this Rome wasn't built in a day. and maybe wherever this is headed for me, it ain't gonna happen in a day either. And that really had to happen for me. And I think probably for a lot of folks, obviously everybody's unfolding is unique, but really kind of like, yeah, I was being a little, I don't even, maybe even just arrogant that like it was going to be that simple and like almost like I can remember sometimes being like, God, I've been doing this for 3 years. Like, why haven't I gotten onto it yet? And it's like 3 years. I mean, this takes a long time. It did for me in a lot of work. And again, I do think everybody's path is unique, so I'm not going to say it's for sure like that for everyone, but I do encounter some people who kind of remind me a little bit of that phase. And it's like, yeah, I'd buckle up for the long haul if I were you. I mean, if you really want to get onto this and you really want to get clear for yourself, then I invite you to step into a phase of maturity and, you know, settle in and trust yourself more and more, and your path will be unique. But it's it's just if you're looking for a quick fix, I didn't find it. And in fact, just to circle back to Mike Connors, like some of those episodes of emotions, that wasn't like a day. I mean, sometimes that was weeks and weeks of feeling really angry and just or really hurt. I mean, it just didn't move through it like it's just water. It took a long time and a maturing, basically.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing I'm curious about, we talked before this interview about how you don't have a website, you're not on social media, you are not putting yourself out there as a spiritual teacher or guru, not making a living off of this. Um, and and at times I've got the impression that kind of waffle, like, do I even want to say anything to anybody? Maybe I'll just go back to, go back to the mountains and shut my door. I'm just curious, like
Yeah.
I mean, is it frustration of working with people?
Um,
What do you know what's behind that?
well, I'll say two things. One is less important, and this is the less important thing. I worked with someone who was like that, and I think when you really come in rapport with someone, sometimes you can start borrowing some of their energy. Um, that's the lesser important thing I'll say. The more important thing is that, Sean, this was a path of a lot of grace, but equally a lot of grit. I mean, this was not easy. This was really hard at times, really disorientating. We didn't even really get into it, but went put through some really crazy life situations, like career and stuff, and so there is a part of me that's just let everyone be. I'm happy to answer their questions, but I'm not really trying to go out and wake people up, because I just know and live that it can be, doesn't have to be, but it can be a really rough ride. And the only other thing I'll just say is I'll just be really candid and say that I've had some interactions with seekers that, you know, you, a lot, I've met some really nice people. So I don't want people to take this wrong, but when you've really, really grinded and kind of, when you're just giving everything to this, and then you try to communicate with people, and you can almost sense that it's kind of going in one ear and out the other. And the reason is not because they're bad or anything, but because we live in a time of almost like a spiritual buffet. I mean, there's just so many people out there talking, and it feels like there's way too many cooks in the kitchen. So part of me is just like, I'm really happy to answer people's questions, but it's almost painful to really try and point and just watch how it's kind of just like, eh. And that's maybe just my experience, but I still do it because I love it and I just can't help not. But I'm really not trying to go out and hang out a shingle and speak to the masses. I can't imagine. I mean, look, if that could happen, the inspiration can come anytime. Everything's spontaneous. That could come. But right now, it just feels like, oh, I just love just letting everyone and everything be exactly as they are, and they're already the truth anyway. That's what that's what realization showed me. So I don't even really see them as unawake. I mean, so I can let them be, but that's just kind of my feeling. Maybe it'll change in time. I'm open to it changing in time, and it very well might. We'll see.
No, thanks for sharing more on that. I
What's
appreciate
your
it.
experience like that?
Well, it's very interesting how you talk about, you mentioned the rapport with your primary teacher. Yeah, I would say that Richard Rose was my primary teacher. He really, really emphasized this pay it back, that if you find something, you have a duty to share it in some way.
Mhm.
And so in a sense, I grew up in the spiritual search with that idea as a just a core principle. So even though I'm a pretty high on the introvert scale,
Yeah,
despite that, I still will say, hey, I need to get out there. I need to say a little something. And that's primarily what keeps me going. The sense that someone put effort to help me, and I'm going to put some effort to help other people.
yeah, that makes sense.
At the same time, though, I like what you said about the buffet, and that's, in a year, maybe I do, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 podcasts, and because you don't need to be listening to podcasts every week.
Yeah,
You don't need, I don't need to be putting out a new episode every week to entertain people because it's
yeah,
not what this is about, right?
yeah.
Somebody should listen to this podcast and really sink into it and really feel into it and then do something on their own
Yeah.
to explore what we're talking about.
Right. Well, I can just say I'm really thankful for this podcast. I'll admit I haven't been an active listener for a while, but Norio's interview was really, really helpful for me, and I was really not expecting that. I was kind of getting to the tail end of listening to many talks at that time, but that it does show you how this is all intertwined, and even just things you don't expect. Certain talks can really have a big effect, and you just never know, when or who. But that talk and your documentary of Mike Connors was actually really important. I'm glad we've chatted because those things played a big role in my path. So it's nice to kind of talk and connect with you.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. Well, we're coming up on the hour and a half mark. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like would be important to mention?
Um, coming back down into relative experience and playing with that some, I'll just say I found one other thing that I think is really helpful. And that is if you ask yourself sincerely for guidance or help, it will come. And I tested that a number of times. And it never came in the form that I thought it was going to come in, but I'd always get an intuitive bump of, well, you asked for it, here it is. And so if you're listening to this and you're in maybe those years where kind of confused and you've heard a lot of teachers and you don't really know what direction to go. Your ace in the hole can always be get with yourself, get quiet, spend a little bit of time trying to figure out, what you want guidance about. But then when you get clear with what you want guidance about and you sincerely ask yourself, you'll get it. And that's just a little thing I found, but it can really be a game changer because in the beginning, or I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about, you know, us discovering us. We're all on our own path, and it's unique. And your teacher, as you've all read many many times, is your best teacher is inside you. That's the real teacher. So I just offer that to anyone who might want to try it.
Well, I have one last question. I usually like to ask most of my guests, since I have in the past made a few films. Is there a movie that you feel like captures some of the spiritual search or has a profundity to it that you would recommend to people?
Oh, there's some really good movies out there. I'll give you two. I'll give you a book first. The Razor's Edge. Definitely my favorite book, and that kind of tells of the kind of the spiritual search, and I like it because it kind of takes it through what Larry, the protagonist, and his some of the different experiences kind of he was put through as he was on his path, and how it was unique and not always easy, but it was kind of he chose to walk down the road less traveled, and a lot of this spiritual search is just that you're kind of going away. The world isn't going. You're kind of walking a different way. So I would recommend that book, but this is a little bit uh, spiritually gooey, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the best spiritual movie by far is Groundhog Day, because that really typifies, I think, of how do we're stuck here, we're identifying as a separate somebody, we're confused, we're lost, we're in a state of resistance, we want to get out, we're trying to find a way. We can even have the strategy that Bill Murray did in that movie of he tries suicide as a way out. He tries to help somebody, compassion as a way out. I mean, he tries everything he can, and nothing works. I mean, nothing works. And that is really what I found is true. And then he starts to embrace naturally, organically, just living and not trying to bust through or transcend or do anything. And that's kind of the resonance of what I mean by abiding as self, abiding as unborn, not trying to, you've moved away from trying to make another experience, and you're just in that space. And then lo and behold, he wakes up. The next day comes. And that's how what my search was. It was just like that. So that's kind of the movie I went to.
Nice. Well, I will, just so our listeners know, I will link to as many of the books and teachers and resources that we spoke of during this episode. I'll link to those in the show notes. So folks can definitely go to spiritualteachers.org and check out more of those if they're interested.
Right.
With that, I just want to say thank you, Tyler. I really appreciated this opportunity to get to speak a little more, and I appreciate the efforts that you make to put yourself out there to give the occasional talk. I know that you've also um, done some work with the Pittsburgh Self-Inquiry Group occasionally, and
Yep.
I think that's awesome that you are making those efforts.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. I had some fun with this, and hope to maybe see you out at the TAT Center one of these times.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. For more information about today's guest, as well as more interviews, books, and other resources, go to spiritualteachers.org. That's spiritualteachers.org.